The bass from the nightclub pulsed through my body, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat as I leaned against the bar. My fingers were sticky from spilled cocktails, and the air smelled of expensive cologne mingled with sweat. 3 hours into my shift, my feet screamed in the high heels that were mandatory for all female staff at Velvet, Miami's most exclusive nightclub. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, feeling it cling to my damp neck. "Liv, table 12 needs service," Marco, the floor manager, shouted over the music, his eyes raking over me with familiar disdain. I nodded, grabbing a tray and navigating through the crowd. My black dress clung to my body, cut just high enough to be presentable, while still attracting the kind of tips that paid my rent. 6 months ago, I would have laughed if someone told me I'd be cocktail waitressing at 26 with a journalism degree gathering dust. But 6 months ago, I hadn't been desperate. I spotted Ellie, my best friend, and the reason I'd gotten this job, serving champagne to a group of men in suits at the VIP section. Even from across the room, I could tell something was wrong. Her shoulders were hunched, her smile forced. As I approached, I caught the tail end of what a man was saying to her. "Don't have a choice, sweetheart. The debt has to be paid one way or another." Ellie's face had drained of color. The man speaking had his back to me, but I could see his reflection in the mirrored wall behind the booth. Dark hair, expensive suit, broad shoulders. The men flanking him had the unmistakable bulge of concealed weapons under their jackets. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "Please, I haven't seen Jason in weeks." "Your boyfriend borrowed money. A lot of money," the man said, his voice eerily calm. "When men borrow from me, they pay. When they disappear, someone pays for them." My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized who I was looking at. Everyone in Miami knew of Dante Russo, even if most had never seen him. At 32, he controlled most of the city's underbelly: drugs, gambling, money laundering, all wrapped in the veneer of legitimate business. The kind of man whose name was whispered rather than spoken aloud. "I can get some money by the end of the month," Ellie stammered. "I just need time. Time isn't what I'm offering." Russo reached out and caught her wrist as she tried to move away. "But I'm sure we can find another arrangement. Pretty girl like you has other ways to repay." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion of working double shifts for months. Maybe it was remembering how Ellie had been there for me after Mom died. How she'd given me a place to stay when I couldn't make rent. Or maybe it was simply that I was tired of men thinking they owned the world and everyone in it. I set my tray down on a nearby table and strode toward them, adrenaline making my vision sharpen to crystal clarity. "Let her go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Russo didn't even turn around. One of his men stepped toward me, but Russo raised a hand, stopping him. "This doesn't concern you, waitress. It's my friend you're threatening, so yeah, it concerns me." My hands were shaking, but I balled them into fists at my sides. He finally turned, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Photos in news articles didn't do Dante Russo justice. His face was all sharp angles and perfect symmetry, dark eyes set beneath heavy brows, his mouth a sculptor's dream, the kind of beautiful that made you forget he was dangerous, which made him all the more lethal. "Your friend's boyfriend owes me $200,000, he said, his voice a low rumble that I felt in my spine. "That debt doesn't disappear because she bats her eyelashes and says please." Ellie looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Olivia, don't. She doesn't owe you anything," I said, cutting her off. "If you have a problem with Jason, take it up with him." Russo's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he wasn't used to being interrupted. The corner of his mouth twitched, and I couldn't tell if he was amused or angry. Both seemed equally dangerous. "Debts transfer," he said simply, as if explaining something to a child. "That's how it works in my world. She vouched for him. She lives with him. She's responsible." "That's not how the real world works," I countered, knowing I should stop, but unable to. "That's how predators work." The air around the table seemed to freeze. His men tensed, hands moving subtly toward their weapons. Russo himself went completely still, his eyes darkening as they fixed on me. I felt like a mouse that had just challenged a cat, belatedly realizing the terrible mistake I'd made. "I think you should apologize to Mr. Russo." one of his men said quietly, menace dripping from every word. Russo raised a hand again, silencing him without looking away from me. No. Let her speak. I'm curious to hear what else she has to say. The invitation, delivered in that soft, controlled voice, terrified me more than any threat could have. I knew I should back down, apologize, retreat. But Ellie was trembling beside him, and all I could think about was how many others had been in her position, intimidated and threatened by men with power. She works here because she needs to pay rent and eat, not to be harassed by men who think money buys them ownership of other people, I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to control it. Find Jason if you want your money. Leave her alone. The club seemed to fade away, the music muffling as Russo stood, towering over me. He was at least a foot taller, his presence filling the space between us until it was hard to breathe. His cologne, something woodsy and expensive, enveloped me as he stepped closer. You have no idea who you're talking to, he said, voice deceptively gentle. I know exactly who you are, I replied, and I don't care. It happened so fast. He reached for Ellie's arm again, his fingers closing around her wrist in what looked like a painful grip. She whimpered, and something in me broke free. My palm connected with his cheek before I could think twice. The crack of skin against skin was lost in the music, but I felt the impact vibrate up my arm. His head barely moved from the force, but the red mark bloomed instantly on his olive skin. Time stopped. The bodyguards moved forward, but again, Russo held them back with a nearly imperceptible gesture. His eyes never left mine, and to my horror, the corner of his mouth curved upward. Finally, he said, his voice a caress that made my skin prickle with warning. A real woman. My stomach dropped. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected. Anger, threats, even violence, but not this strange approval that glittered in his eyes. Mr. Russo, one of his men started. Leave us, Russo commanded, not looking away from me. When they hesitated, he added, now. They withdrew a few steps, still watching. Russo rubbed his jaw where my hand had connected, the small smile never leaving his face. What's your name? He asked. I swallowed hard. None of your business. His smile widened. Olivia, isn't it? That's what your friend called you. I cursed silently. What do you want? Originally, to collect a debt. His eyes traveled over my face, lingering on my lips before returning to my eyes. Now I'm finding myself distracted. Liv, Ellie whispered urgently. I'm so sorry. Jason told me he needed money for his mother's surgery. I had no idea. It's okay, I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't. Nothing about this situation was okay. Russo watched our exchange with interest. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Your friend's debt is now yours to resolve. My blood ran cold. What? You heard me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it between two fingers. Call this number tomorrow. We'll discuss terms. I'm not calling you, I said, even as I felt the situation spiraling further out of my control. He stepped closer, so close I could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'll return to collect from your friend. And trust me, Olivia, you don't want that. The way he said my name made it sound like he was tasting it, savoring it. I took the card reflexively, my fingers brushing against his. The brief contact sent an unwelcome jolt through my body. This isn't over, I warned, trying to sound braver than I felt. No, he agreed, that unsettling smile returning. It's just beginning. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Olivia? Don't even think about running. I would find you. The threat was delivered like a promise, like something I should look forward to. I watched him walk away, his men falling into step behind him, parting the crowd without effort. My legs felt weak, and I collapsed onto the seat Russo had vacated. What have I done? I whispered. Ellie gripped my hand, her fingers ice cold. You shouldn't have done that, Liv. Do you know who he is? What he does to people who cross him? I nodded numbly, staring at the business card in my hand. It was heavy cardstock, embossed with just a phone number. No name, no company. I'll figure this out, I promised, though I had no idea how. Jason got you into this mess. I won't let you pay for his mistakes. You don't understand, Ellie said, her voice breaking. Jason's gone. Really gone. He emptied our account and disappeared 3 days ago. Left a note saying he was sorry, that he was in too deep. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. Jason hadn't just run from Russo. He'd abandoned Ellie, left her to face the consequences. We'll go to the police, I suggested, knowing even as I said it how useless that would be. Russo owned half the department, if rumors were true. Ellie shook her head. There's nothing they can do, nothing anyone can do. Marco appeared at my elbow, his face tight with anger. What the hell was that, Olivia? Do you know who you just pissed off? I know exactly who he is, I snapped. No, you don't, Marco hissed. That man can make people disappear with a phone call, and you slapped him. In my club. He was threatening Ellie, and now he's interested in you, Marco said, his voice dropping. God help you. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Every time the door opened, my heart stopped, expecting to see Russo or his men returning. By closing time, my nerves were frayed to breaking point. Ellie and I walked to my car in silence, jumping at shadows in the parking garage. The night air was thick with humidity, pressing down on us like a physical weight. You can stay with me tonight, I offered as we reached my ancient Honda. Ellie shook her head. No, I don't want to drag you further into this. I'll pack a bag and go to my sister's in Orlando tomorrow. You think distance will stop a man like Russo? I asked, immediately regretting my harsh tone when I saw her flinch. What choice do I have? She whispered. I had no answer. We drove to my small apartment in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. The business card seemed to burn in my pocket, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Sleep evaded me that night. I lay awake, replaying the moment my hand connected with Russo's face, the shock of it, the strange thrill that had coursed through me, and worse, the way his eyes had lit up, as if I'd done exactly what he wanted. Finally, a real woman. What did that even mean? And why couldn't I stop hearing his voice in my head? Morning came too soon, sunlight filtering through my thin curtains. Ellie was already up, making coffee in my tiny kitchen. I've been thinking, she said, handing me a mug. Maybe we can get the money. Between us, our savings, selling my car. $200,000? I interrupted. Ellie, we'd need 10 years to save that much. She collapsed into a chair, defeated. Then what do we do? I pulled out the business card, staring at the number embossed on it. I call. I find out what he wants. Liv. No. What choice do we have? I echoed her words from last night. At least this way, we know what we're dealing with. My finger hovered over my phone's screen. One call could change everything, but not calling wasn't an option. Russo had made that clear. I dialed before I could lose my nerve, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the ringing over the rush of blood in my ears. Ms. Carter. His voice came through immediately, as if he'd been waiting for my call. Not a question. He knew exactly who was calling. Of course he did. He probably knew where I lived, where I shopped, everything about me. How do you know my last name? I demanded, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. I know many things about you, Olivia Rose Carter, he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. 26 years old, journalism degree from University of Miami. Mother deceased, father unknown. Best friend, Eleanor Jenkins. No boyfriends in the last year. Prefers whiskey sour when she drinks, which isn't often. Drives a 2014 Honda Civic that's overdue for an oil change. Each word was a blow, stripping away what little security I had left. He'd researched me thoroughly, in less than 12 hours. What do you want? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Have dinner with me tonight, he said, catching me completely off guard. Dinner? I repeated stupidly. I'm not having dinner with you. Yes, you are, he replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. 8 o'clock. A car will pick you up. If you think... The alternative? he interrupted smoothly, is that I collect the debt from Eleanor in a much less pleasant way. Your choice, Olivia. Dinner with me, or your friend pays. My free hand clenched into a fist. Fine, dinner. Excellent, he purred. Wear something nice. The line went dead. I set my phone down, feeling numb. Ellie watched me, her face pale with worry. What did he say? She whispered. I looked up at her, the friend who had been there through everything, my mother's death, my struggles to find work, every setback and small victory. He wants to have dinner with me tonight, I said, the words sounding surreal even as they left my mouth. Ellie's eyes widened. Dinner? That's not what I expected. Neither had I, and that terrified me more than any threat could have. What game was Dante Russo playing? And more importantly, what would happen when we sat across a table from each other, with nothing between us but air and whatever dangerous interest I'd sparked when my hand struck his face? The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. I called in sick to Velvet, knowing I couldn't face Marco after last night's confrontation. Ellie left for her sister's around noon, despite my protests that running wouldn't solve anything. We both knew she was right to go. The further she was from Russo, the safer she'd be, at least for now. Promise you'll call me after dinner, she said at the door, her eyes brimming with guilt. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you get out of there. I nodded, not wanting to point out the obvious. That getting out wasn't really an option when dealing with someone like Dante Russo. After she left, I paced my apartment, alternating between panic and a strange, detached calm. By 6 o'clock, I stood before my closet, staring at the meager selection of nice clothes I owned. Nothing seemed appropriate for dinner with a man who probably owned suits that cost more than my rent. I settled on a simple black dress, the only one I had that wasn't for work, with a modest neckline, but a hemline just above my knees. Professional enough to send the message that this was a business meeting, not a date, but still formal enough for wherever he planned to take me. I paired it with the only decent heels I owned, and spent more time than usual on my makeup, telling myself it was armor rather than an attempt to impress. At precisely 7:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Car arriving in 5 minutes. My stomach clenched. Part of me had been holding on to a desperate hope that he'd forget or change his mind. That hope evaporated as I watched a sleek black Bentley pull up outside my apartment building 3 minutes later. A mountain of a man in a tailored suit stepped out and scanned the area before approaching my building. My doorbell rang moments later. When I opened the door, he gave me a curt nod. Ms. Carter, I'm Anton. Mr. Russo sent me to escort you. His accent was Eastern European, his expression professionally blank. He didn't look like a chauffeur, he looked like security. I can find my way to a car, I said, more sharply than intended. Anton didn't react. Mr. Russo's instructions were explicit. I am to escort you directly to him. The corridor suddenly felt very narrow, very isolated. I grabbed my small clutch purse and phone, locking the door behind me with hands that shook slightly. Anton led the way, maintaining a respectful distance but keeping me firmly in his sight. The evening air hit me as we stepped outside, Miami's persistent humidity making my carefully styled hair begin to frizz immediately. Anton opened the car door, and I slid into the cool leather interior, noting the privacy partition that separated the driver's compartment from the back. Where are we going? I asked, as Anton took his place behind the wheel. Mr. Russo is at his residence, he replied, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. He prefers privacy for important discussions. Alarm bells rang in my head. I thought we were having dinner at a restaurant. Mr. Russo doesn't dine in public establishments often, Anton said, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for debate. I swallowed hard, trying to quell the rising panic. Going to Russo's home put me at an even greater disadvantage. No witnesses, no public setting to moderate his behavior, or mine. I considered demanding to be taken to a restaurant, but something told me Anton's instructions were non-negotiable. The drive took us away from the city center and toward the exclusive waterfront properties of Star Island. We passed through a guarded gate where Anton exchanged a few words with security, then wound down a private drive lined with royal palms. The house, mansion, really, appeared at the end of the drive, a modern glass and stone structure overlooking Biscayne Bay. 2 more guards stood at the entrance, scanning me with practiced eyes as Anton led me inside. The interior was a minimalist's dream: open space, clean lines, museum-quality art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the illuminated Miami skyline across the water. "This way," Anton directed, leading me through the main hall to a terrace that wrapped around the back of the house. And there he was. Dante Russo stood at the balustrade, his back to me, looking out over the water. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. The casual posture did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. "Sir," Anton announced, "Ms. Carter has arrived." "Thank you, Anton," Russo replied without turning. "That will be all." Anton nodded and withdrew, leaving me alone with the most dangerous man in Miami. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like a prison cell locking. Russo finally turned, and the full force of his attention hit me like a physical blow. His dark eyes assessed me in one swift, comprehensive glance that somehow made me feel both seen and exposed. "Olivia," he said, my name in his mouth sounding intimate in a way that made my skin heat. "Thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His mouth curved in that same unsettling half-smile I'd seen the night before. "Everyone has choices. You made yours when you stepped into that car." He gestured to a glass-topped table set for 2, with candles already lit and wine breathing in a crystal decanter. "Please sit. Dinner will be served shortly." I hesitated, then moved to the chair he indicated, hyper-aware of his eyes on me as I sat. He took the seat opposite, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "Your home is—" I searched for a word that wasn't a compliment. "Isolated." "I value my privacy," he said, pouring wine into my glass without asking if I wanted any. "Especially when getting to know someone new." "Is that what we're doing? Getting to know each other?" I asked, leaving the wine untouched. "That's exactly what we're doing." He poured himself a glass and took a sip, watching me over the rim. "Tell me about yourself, Olivia." I almost laughed. "You already seem to know everything. My full name, my car, my drinking preferences, surface details," he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Anyone can learn those with the right resources." "And you have unlimited resources," I stated. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I prefer to think of it as being thorough. Some might call it stalking." That earned me a genuine smile, one that transformed his face and made him look almost approachable. "Almost." "Most people wouldn't say that to my face," he noted. "I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, his eyes darkening. "You're not." That became abundantly clear last night. The memory of my hand connecting with his face flashed between us. I fought the urge to apologize, not because I regretted defending Ellie, but because the reminder of my impulsivity made me acutely aware of my vulnerability now. A staff member appeared silently, serving an appetizer of seared scallops before disappearing again. I stared at the perfectly plated food, my appetite non-existent. "You should eat," Russo said, noticing my hesitation. "I assure you, it's not poisoned." "That's exactly what someone who poisoned food would say," I replied automatically. He laughed, a rich sound that seemed to roll through the air between us. "If I wanted to harm you, Olivia, I wouldn't need to resort to poison." The casual threat should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself picking up my fork, more to have something to do with my hands than from any desire to eat. "Why am I here?" I asked bluntly. "What do you really want?" Russo set down his wine glass, his expression becoming more serious. "Directness. I appreciate that." He leaned forward slightly. "I want to offer you a proposition." My stomach twisted. "I'm not interested in being one of your acquisitions." "You misunderstand," he said, though the glint in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely displeased by my assumption. "This is about business, and your friend's debt." He reached for something beside his plate, a folder I hadn't noticed before, and slid it across the table to me. "Open it." With reluctant fingers, I flipped the folder open. Inside were photos of Jason, Ellie's boyfriend, meeting with men I didn't recognize, exchanging what looked like documents. The final photo showed Jason boarding a plane. "Your friend's boyfriend didn't just steal from me," Russo said, his voice hardening. "He sold information. Names of my associates, details about certain operations. He thought he could take my money, sell my secrets, and disappear." I stared at the photos, my mind racing. "So you're not just after the money?" "The money is irrelevant," he confirmed. "What matters is the principle. No one steals from me and walks away." Fear gripped me, not for myself, but for Ellie. She had nothing to do with this. She didn't know, perhaps not, he conceded. But she brought him into my world. She vouched for him when he needed introductions. That doesn't make her responsible for his actions. In my world, it does. His tone was implacable. "However, I'm willing to consider an alternative arrangement." I swallowed hard. "What kind of arrangement?" Russo studied me for a moment, as if deciding whether I was worthy of his proposition. "You're a journalist, yes. Graduated with honors before the economy forced you into less suitable employment." I nodded warily, unsure where this was going. "I have a position that needs filling. Someone with your skills. Research, writing, attention to detail. My previous media relations coordinator recently departed." The way he hesitated on that last word made my blood run cold. I didn't want to know what departed meant in Russo's vocabulary. "You want me to work for you?" I asked incredulously. "For 6 months," he specified. "During which time, your friend's debt will be considered paid. After that, you're free to go, with a recommendation that will open doors at any publication you choose." I laughed hollowly. "Right. Because former PR for Miami's biggest crime lord looks great on a resume." His expression didn't change. "Publicly, you would be working for the Russo Group, a legitimate enterprise with interests in real estate, hospitality, and private equity. And privately, you would report directly to me," he said, his eyes holding mine. "Handle certain sensitive communications. Ensure the right narrative reaches the right ears." I took a sip of wine, needing something to steady myself. "And if I refuse, then Eleanor Jenkins will be responsible for her boyfriend's full debt, both financial and otherwise." The threat hung in the air between us, made all the more menacing by his calm delivery. I set down my glass carefully, buying time to think. What would this job entail exactly? "You would move into the guest house on this property," he said, gesturing toward a smaller building visible through the windows. "You would be at my disposal 24 hours a day. Your primary duties would involve managing press releases, monitoring media coverage of my legitimate businesses, and occasionally redirecting attention from my other interests." "You want me to lie," I translated. "I want you to shape the truth," he corrected. "Something journalists do every day, though few admit it." The server returned, clearing our barely touched appetizers and replacing them with perfectly cooked steaks. I ignored the food, my mind racing through scenarios, looking for a way out that didn't exist. "What guarantee do I have that after 6 months you'll let me go?" I asked finally. "My word," he replied simply. I scoffed, the word of a criminal. His expression hardened. "I have never broken my word, Olivia. Not once. Ask anyone in this city who knows me." "Why me?" I challenged, changing tactics. "You could hire anyone with my qualifications. Someone who actually wants the job. Because you showed me something last night that's rare," he said, his voice dropping to a lower register that seemed to vibrate through me. "Courage, loyalty, fire." The way he said that last word made heat curl in my stomach, unwelcome and confusing. "Most people in this city scurry away when I enter a room," he continued. "They simper and agree, or they avoid eye contact entirely. Not you. You looked me in the eye and slapped me across the face." His smile returned, sharp-edged and dangerous. "Do you have any idea how refreshing that is?" I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me was horrified that my moment of reckless bravery had caught his interest so completely. Another part, a part I didn't want to examine too closely, felt a forbidden thrill at his words. 6 months, I said finally. "Then Ellie's debt is cleared completely, and I walk away. No strings, no conditions, no contact." Russo tilted his head, considering. "Agreed. with one amendment. During those 6 months, you will be exclusively mine. No outside relationships, no contact with former colleagues. Your friend can call once a week to verify your well-being, but otherwise, your focus remains here. I'm not agreeing to be your prisoner, I said, my voice rising. Not a prisoner, he corrected. An employee with specific terms of service. You'll be well compensated. $50,000 upon completion, in addition to salary and accommodations. The amount made me pause. $50,000 would change my life, pay off my student loans, give me a fresh start after this ordeal was over. When would this arrangement begin? I asked, already knowing I had no real choice. Tonight, he replied, watching my reaction carefully. The guest house is prepared. Your belongings will be collected tomorrow. I need time to think, I insisted. You have until we finish dinner, he countered, after which I need your decision. I stared at him, trying to read his intentions beyond the business proposition. There was something in his eyes when he looked at me, something possessive and hungry that had nothing to do with media relations. Why the rush? I asked. Why tonight? He set down his cutlery and leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, because Jason was found in Cancun this afternoon. By tomorrow, news of his unfortunate accident will reach Miami. I need my media specialist in place before that happens. My blood turned to ice. What did you do to him? Nothing he didn't bring on himself, Russo replied, his tone dismissive. The real question is, what will you do, Olivia? Save yourself and your friend, or join him in suffering the consequences of his choices? The real choice was painfully clear. Become Dante Russo's captive employee, or condemn Ellie to whatever fate he had planned for those who crossed him. No choice at all. I'll do it, I said quietly. 6 months. Then we're done. Something flickered in his eyes, triumph, satisfaction, and something darker I couldn't name. Excellent decision. He raised his wine glass in a toast. To new beginnings. I raised mine automatically, the crystal catching the candlelight. To surviving them, I countered. His smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. I think we'll get along very well, Olivia. I doubted that. But as we clinked glasses, sealing our devil's bargain, I realized with growing unease that part of me was curious about what lay ahead, about him, about this strange, dangerous world I was stepping into. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and subtle power plays. Russo asked questions about my background, my education, my career aspirations before economic reality had intervened. I answered minimally, still processing what I'd agreed to. When the meal concluded, he stood. I'll have Anton show you to the guest house. Get some rest. We begin at 7 tomorrow morning. I need to call Ellie, I said. Let her know she's safe. He nodded. Of course. Tell her the debt is settled, provided you fulfill your end of our arrangement. His eyes held mine, the warning clear. And Olivia? Remember that everything you do reflects on me now. I protect what's mine, fiercely. The possessive claim sent a shiver down my spine. I'm not yours, I said automatically. I'm your employee. Temporarily. His smile was knowing, patient, as if I'd said something naively amusing. For the next 6 months, there's very little difference. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell his cologne. Sleep well, Olivia. Tomorrow, your new life begins. As Anton led me to the guest house, the full weight of what I'd agreed to settled over me. 6 months in Dante Russo's world, under his control, at his beck and call. 6 months pretending to support a criminal empire while looking for a way to protect Ellie and myself. 6 months trying to ignore whatever dangerous interest I'd sparked in Miami's most notorious crime lord. The guest house was beautiful, all modern luxury and expensive furnishings. But as the door closed behind me, it felt like nothing more than a gilded cage. I pulled out my phone to call Ellie, to tell her she was safe, even if I wasn't sure I could say the same about myself. As I dialed her number, I caught my reflection in a window. Behind me, across the immaculately landscaped grounds, I could see Russo standing on his terrace, watching my new temporary home, watching me. A predator keeping an eye on his newest acquisition. Morning arrived with brutal efficiency. sunlight streaming through windows whose blinds I hadn't thought to close. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, until yesterday's events came rushing back. The guest house. Russo. Our deal. My phone showed 6:30 a.m. No missed calls from Ellie. She'd been too upset after our conversation last night to talk further, promising to call today when she'd processed everything. I couldn't blame her. I was still processing it myself. The closet, which I'd been too exhausted to explore last night, revealed a selection of women's clothing in my size. The discovery sent a chill down my spine. Russo had prepared for my arrival, confident I would agree to his terms. Or perhaps he'd never intended to give me a choice at all. I selected the most conservative option, black trousers and a white blouse, and made my way to the bathroom. Like everything else in the guest house, it was designed for luxury, with a rainfall shower and marble countertops. I took my time, using the expensive toiletries provided, postponing the inevitable moment when I would have to face Russo again. At precisely 6:55 a.m., a knock came at the door. Anton stood outside, his expression impassive as always. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Russo is waiting for you in the main house." I nodded, smoothing down my blouse in a nervous gesture. "Lead the way." The morning air was already warm, promising another scorching Miami day. Dew clung to the manicured lawn between the guest house and the main residence, dampening the hem of my trousers as we walked. 2 security guards patrolled the perimeter, and I noticed cameras strategically placed throughout the grounds. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Anton led me through a different entrance than the previous night, bringing me to what appeared to be a home office. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, a massive desk dominated the center of the room, and a seating area with leather sofas occupied the far corner. Everything spoke of wealth and taste, without being ostentatious. Russo sat behind the desk, phone to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes performing that same swift assessment that made me feel stripped bare. He gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk, continuing his conversation without pause. I took the opportunity to observe him. In daylight, his features were even more striking, the strong jaw, high cheekbones, and those dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore another impeccably tailored suit, charcoal gray this time, with a pale blue shirt open at the collar. A heavy gold watch glinted at his wrist, the only jewelry he wore. He ended his call abruptly and set the phone down. "Good morning, Olivia. Did you sleep well?" "As well as can be expected," I replied honestly. He smiled slightly. "It takes time to adjust to new surroundings. Coffee?" He gestured to a silver carafe on a side table. "Please." My voice came out rougher than intended, betraying my need for caffeine. He rose and poured 2 cups himself rather than calling for staff, a gesture that might have seemed considerate from anyone else. From Russo, it felt like another power play, showing he didn't need servants to attend to every need. He handed me a cup, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. I tried to ignore the small jolt of awareness the contact triggered. "Today will be primarily orientation," he said, returning to his seat. "You'll need to understand the structure of the Russo Group, meet key personnel, and familiarize yourself with current projects and media strategies." I took a sip of coffee, strong, with notes of chocolate and spice. "You speak as if this is a normal corporate job." "For many aspects, it is," he replied. "The Russo Group employs over 500 people across legitimate enterprises. Hotels, nightclubs, real estate developments, all requiring standard business operations." "And the not-so-legitimate enterprises?" I asked boldly. His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Those remain separate. Your role primarily concerns the public-facing aspects of my business." "Primarily," I repeated, "but not entirely." "Smart girl," he murmured, and I bristled at the condescension. "I'm 26, not a girl," I corrected. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps, or approval. "Indeed. A fact I'm well aware of, Olivia." The way he said my name, drawing out each syllable, made it sound like a caress. I shifted uncomfortably, hating my body's involuntary response to his voice. "Your first task will be reviewing press coverage from the past 3 months," he continued, sliding a tablet across the desk. I want to understand how you analyze information, identify patterns, recognize potential threats. I took the tablet, keeping my expression neutral. Threats to your business or threats to your criminal activities? They're one and the same, he replied simply. Any threat to my reputation impacts all my interests. I wanted to argue the point, to maintain some moral high ground, but the reality of my situation made such posturing meaningless. For the next 6 months, I worked for Dante Russo, regardless of how I felt about his empire's foundations. I'll need access to databases, news archives, I said instead, shifting to practical concerns. You'll have everything you require, he assured me. My executive assistant, Sophia, will provide access credentials and show you to your office. I have an office? I asked, surprised. Of course. Did you think you'd be working from the guest house? He raised an eyebrow. This is a professional arrangement, Olivia. I expect professionalism in return. Before I could respond, a knock came at the door. A woman entered, mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Her eyes flicked to me briefly before focusing on Russo. Mr. Russo, your 8:30 is waiting in the conference room, she said, her accent lightly Spanish. Thank you, Sophia, he replied. This is Olivia Carter, our new media relations coordinator. She'll be working closely with us for the foreseeable future. Sophia turned to me, her expression giving nothing away. Welcome, Ms. Carter. Sophia will show you to your office and help you get settled, Russo said, rising from his chair. We'll reconvene at noon to discuss your initial observations. I stood, clutching the tablet like a shield. And if I have questions before then? Sophia can answer most operational queries, he replied. For anything else? He pulled a phone from his desk drawer and handed it to me. This is programmed with necessary contacts. My direct line is the first entry. I took the phone, noting it was the latest model, sleek and expensive. I have my own phone, which you'll use for personal communications only, he said firmly. This one is secure, encrypted. Business matters stay on business devices. Another way to monitor me, I realized, to control my communications, separate me from my normal life. Understood, I said tightly. He stepped closer, his tall frame looming over me. One more thing, Olivia. The information you'll be handling is sensitive, confidential. The consequences for breaching that confidentiality would be severe. Not just for you, but for those you care about. The threat was delivered in the same conversational tone he might use to discuss the weather, making it all the more chilling. Are you threatening Ellie again? I asked, anger flaring despite my best efforts to remain composed. Not threatening, clarifying expectations. His eyes held mine. Trust is earned, not given. Until you earn mine, certain. Safeguards remain in place. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought of his safeguards, but Sophia's presence and the memory of what was at stake kept me silent. I understand, I said finally. Confidentiality is part of our agreement. He smiled, satisfied with my submission, however reluctant. Excellent. Sophia will take care of you now. Sophia led me through the house, pointing out key areas, the kitchen where I could get lunch, the small gym, the main conference room. The entire building seemed designed to allow work and life to blend seamlessly, with no need to ever leave. Another form of control, I realized. My office was smaller than Russo's, but no less impressive. A corner room with windows overlooking the bay, equipped with a state-of-the-art computer, multiple monitors, and a comfortable seating area. Mr. Russo had this prepared specifically for you, Sophia said, watching my reaction. He rarely brings new people into his inner circle. I'm not in his inner circle, I corrected. I'm a temporary employee with a specific contract duration. Sophia's expression didn't change, but something knowing flickered in her eyes. Of course, your login credentials are here. She handed me a sealed envelope. The system will prompt you to change your password on first login. All activities are monitored, naturally. Naturally, I echoed dryly. She hesitated at the door. A word of advice, Ms. Carter. Mr. Russo values competence and loyalty above all else. Provide both, and your time here will be less complicated. With that cryptic statement, she left, closing the door behind her. I sank into the ergonomic chair, setting both tablets on the desk. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my situation, alone in a criminal's mansion, cut off from my normal life, with only a tenuous agreement protecting me and Ellie. Then I straightened my shoulders and logged into the computer. If I was going to survive the next 6 months, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The morning passed in a blur of research. The Russo Group was, on paper, an impressive conglomerate with diversified interests across hospitality, real estate, and import-export businesses. Their press coverage was overwhelmingly positive: charitable donations, job creation, urban renewal projects. Nothing hinted at the darker enterprises I knew lurked beneath the surface. Too perfect, I realized. No business empire this size maintained such an unblemished public image without manipulation. I began noting patterns: which reporters consistently covered Russo favorably, which publications never mentioned the company at all, which stories appeared to have been deliberately buried. At noon exactly, my office phone rang. "Mr. Russo is ready for you," Sophia's voice informed me. I gathered my notes and both tablets, steeling myself for the next encounter. When I arrived at Russo's office, the door was open. He stood by the window, his back to me, speaking in hushed tones to a man I didn't recognize. Short, balding, with an expensive suit that somehow looked rumpled despite its quality. "Need this handled quietly," the man was saying. "The commissioner can't afford." He broke off when he noticed me, his expression shifting from worry to blank politeness. "Ah, Miss Carter," Russo said, turning. "Thank you for joining us. Commissioner Rodriguez was just leaving." The police commissioner. Of course, Russo had the city's top law enforcement official making house calls. The commissioner nodded to me stiffly and hurried out, avoiding eye contact. "Have a seat," Russo invited, as if we hadn't just witnessed something ethically questionable. "Tell me your observations." I sat, organizing my thoughts. "Your press coverage is immaculate. Too immaculate." A small smile played at his lips. "Explain." "No corporation this size avoids negative coverage entirely. There's usually something: labor disputes, environmental concerns, executive misconduct. The Russo Group has none of that. Instead, you have consistent, strategically placed positive stories that create a perfect corporate citizen narrative. And you find this suspicious?" He leaned back in his chair, watching me intently. "I find it manufactured," I corrected. "Which raises the question of what's being hidden beneath all this carefully cultivated goodwill." He laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation that caught me off guard. "Excellent. Most people see what they're meant to see. You look for what's missing." "I'm a journalist," I said simply. "Or I was. Still are," he countered, "just with a different employer and objective now." I struggled not to react visibly. His words hit too close to the ethical compromise I was already wrestling with. "What else did you notice?" he asked, folding his hands on the desk. I consulted my notes. 3 reporters consistently get exclusives with your organization. All 3 received journalism awards from foundations with ties to your charitable organizations. 2 local editors who ran negative stories about development projects in Little Havana were replaced within months. And any mention of your name in connection with criminal activities is immediately countered by a profile highlighting your philanthropic work. His expression remained neutral, but I could see approval in his eyes. "Continue." "You're buying influence," I stated plainly. "Not just with money, but with access, recognition, and strategic pressure. Creating a network of media allies while neutralizing potential critics. The term is media relations," he said, amusement coloring his voice. "The term is manipulation," I countered. He shrugged, unbothered by my judgment. "Call it what you will. The system works. Your job is to ensure it continues working." "By helping you manipulate public perception," I said flatly. "By helping manage the narrative surrounding my legitimate businesses," he corrected smoothly. "Nothing in your contract requires you to engage with other aspects of my enterprises, except when they threaten your reputation," I pointed out, remembering his earlier words. His smile widened. "You pay attention. Good." He stood, circling the desk to lean against it, too close for comfort. "Your first assignment is this." He handed me a folder. Inside was information about a waterfront development project facing community opposition. "Local activists claim this project will displace residents and destroy a historic neighborhood," I said, scanning the documents. They've scheduled protests for next week. Precisely. I want this reframed. The development includes affordable housing units, creates hundreds of jobs, and preserves key historic structures. Focus on those aspects. You want me to discredit the opposition? I translated. I want you to highlight the facts that support our position, he countered. Create a press release, identify sympathetic journalists, and develop a strategy to shift public opinion. It was standard PR work, technically ethical if I focused solely on the legitimate aspects of the project. I could do this without compromising my principles too severely. I'll need to verify these claims about affordable housing and historic preservation, I said. Of course. Sophia will arrange site visits, meetings with the development team, whatever you require. He studied me for a moment. You're uncomfortable. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I'm adjusting. To working for someone like me? He asked, his voice dropping lower. Or to finding that the line between right and wrong isn't as clear as you once thought? Both, I wanted to say, but kept silent, unwilling to give him the satisfaction. He straightened, moving back behind his desk. You'll join me for dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. We have more to discuss. Not a request, a command. I bit back my instinctive refusal. Fine. His eyes narrowed slightly at my tone. One more thing, Olivia. While you're here, you represent me. Your appearance, your conduct, everything reflects on the Russo name. I glanced down at my conservative outfit, confused. Is there a problem with how I'm dressed? Not for the office, he replied. For dinner tonight, you'll find more suitable options have been delivered to the guest house. My temper flared. I don't need you choosing my clothes. It wasn't a suggestion, he said mildly, but with steel underneath. 7 o'clock. I left his office seething, humiliation and anger burning in my chest. I'd expected the ethical compromises this job would require, but not this level of personal control. Dictating what I wore, where I lived, how I presented myself. The afternoon passed in a blur of work as I buried my frustration in research and drafting. By 5, I had produced a comprehensive media strategy for the development project, one that emphasized legitimate positive aspects while remaining technically truthful, a compromise I could live with, for now. When I returned to the guest house, a garment bag hung on the closet door. Inside was an emerald green dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my previous salary, along with matching shoes and a small jewelry box containing diamond earrings. I stared at the items, torn between outrage at his presumption and a treacherous appreciation for his taste. The dress was elegant rather than revealing, the jewelry subtle rather than ostentatious. Not what I would have expected from a man accustomed to the company of Miami's most beautiful women. At 6:55, I stood before the mirror, barely recognizing myself. The dress fit perfectly, emphasizing curves I usually downplayed in professional settings. The color made my eyes seem more green than hazel, and my dark hair, which I'd left loose, contrasted dramatically with the emerald fabric. Anton arrived precisely at 7 to escort me, his expression unchanging despite my transformed appearance. The main house was quieter than during the day, most staff apparently gone. He led me not to the terrace where we'd dined previously, but to a smaller, more intimate dining room with a table set for 2. Russo stood as I entered, his eyes moving over me in a slow, appreciative assessment that made my skin warm despite my determination to remain unmoved. Perfect. He said simply, "The dress or the strategy document I sent you?" I asked, keeping my voice cool. His lips curved. Both. Though I admit, the dress exceeds expectations. I'm not one of your possessions to be dressed up, I said, taking my seat without waiting for him to pull out my chair. He sat across from me, unbothered by my small act of defiance. No, you're not, he agreed, surprising me. You're far more interesting than an object. A server appeared with wine, pouring for both of us before retreating silently. To your first day, Russo said, raising his glass. The work you submitted was impressive, thorough, strategic, and subtle in its manipulation. I'd rather you didn't praise my ability to manipulate, I said, taking a small sip of wine. Why not? It's a valuable skill, one you clearly possess. He studied me over the rim of his glass. You manipulated me the moment we met. I nearly choked on my wine. Excuse me? I slapped you. That's not manipulation. No, the slap was impulse, he conceded. But what followed? The way you positioned yourself as the protector, the brave friend willing to take on Eleanor's burden. That was masterful. It wasn't a strategy, I protested. I was trying to help my friend, and in doing so, you offered me something far more valuable than the money Jason stole, he said, his dark eyes intent on mine. You offered me you. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Not entirely from fear. That's not what happened. No? He set down his glass. Then tell me, Olivia, if I had simply forgiven Eleanor's debt that night, would you be sitting here now? Would you have given me a second thought? I opened my mouth to reply, then closed it. He was right, in a way. If he had let Ellie go, I would have walked away, relieved to be free of his attention. I never would have entered his world voluntarily. I'm here because you threatened my friend, I said finally. You're here because I recognize something in you worth pursuing, he countered. The debt was merely convenient leverage. The server returned with our first course, providing a welcome interruption. I used the moment to gather my thoughts, unsettled by his perspective on our initial encounter. You mentioned my work was impressive, I said, steering the conversation back to safer ground. Does that mean you approve the strategy? With one adjustment, he replied, accepting my change of subject. The community leader opposing the project has a history we can exploit. Drug charges from his youth, financial problems, a messy divorce. I want that information released to select journalists. My stomach twisted. This was exactly the kind of ethical line I'd hoped to avoid crossing. That's character assassination, not PR. It's ensuring all relevant facts are considered, he said smoothly. His personal history reflects on his credibility. It's wrong, I insisted. The strategy I outlined focuses on the project's benefits without attacking individuals. Russo's expression hardened slightly. This isn't a debate, Olivia. It's an instruction. You hired me for my expertise, I countered. My professional assessment is that character attacks will backfire, generating sympathy for him and suspicion toward you. He considered me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. A valid point. Present the alternative approach in writing. If you can demonstrate it will be more effective, I'll consider it. It was a small victory, but significant. Proof that he valued competence enough to listen, at least on tactical matters. I felt a flutter of hope that perhaps I could navigate this situation without completely compromising my principles. Thank you, I said simply. His expression softened slightly. Contrary to what you might believe, Olivia, I don't demand blind obedience. I expect loyalty and discretion, yes, but also intelligence and initiative. Sycophants are useless to me. Is that why you responded the way you did? When I slapped you. The question escaped before I could stop it. His smile returned, slow and somehow intimate, partly. Do you know how many people in this city would dare to challenge me as you did? None. It was refreshing. It was stupid, I admitted. Brave, he corrected. There's a fine line between the two. The rest of dinner progressed with surprising ease. Russo proved to be well-read and articulate, discussing everything from politics to literature with genuine insight. I found myself engaged despite my determination to maintain emotional distance. You're not what I expected, I confessed as dessert was served. No, amusement colored his voice. What did you expect? A crude thug counting money and threatening enemies? Something like that, I admitted. Not someone who can quote Dostoevsky and discuss economic theory. The world isn't divided into good educated people and evil criminals, Olivia, he said, his voice softening. People are more complex than that. Even those who make choices you consider wrong. Choices like threatening innocent women over debts they didn't incur? I couldn't help asking. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Choices like building an empire in a world where playing by conventional rules guarantees failure. Where protection requires power, and power requires certain compromises. That sounds like justification, not explanation, I said quietly. He inclined his head. Perhaps. But it's the reality I live in. The reality you're now part of, at least temporarily. As dinner concluded, he walked me back to the guest house himself rather than summoning Anton. The night air was heavy with the scent of jasmine, stars obscured by Miami's ambient light. We walked in silence, the only sound our footsteps on the stone path. At my door, he stopped, turning to face me. You did well today, Olivia, better than I anticipated. Thank you, I said, unsure how to respond to the genuine approval in his voice. He reached out suddenly, his fingers brushing my cheek in a touch so light it might have been imagined. You're different here, he observed. Away from the office, less guarded. I stiffened, taking a small step back. I'm still your employee. That hasn't changed. No, he agreed, dropping his hand. But this arrangement between us, it will evolve over time. They always do. The implication in his words made my heart race. Good night, Mr. Russo. Dante, he corrected, his voice low. When we're alone, at least. I shook my head. That would imply a familiarity I'm not comfortable with. Instead of anger, his expression showed something like admiration. As you wish. For now. He stepped back. 7 a.m. tomorrow, Olivia. We have a busy day ahead. As he walked away, I slipped inside and leaned against the closed door, my heart pounding. 1 day down, 181 to go. Already, the lines I'd drawn were blurring, between professional and personal, between compromise and capitulation, and most disturbing of all, between the fear Dante Russo inspired and something far more dangerous that I wasn't ready to name. Days turned into weeks with unsettling ease. My role at the Russo group fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal at times. Meetings, press releases, media monitoring. I crafted narratives that were technically true, while carefully obscuring less savory aspects of Dante's businesses. I told myself it was just PR, no different from what corporate communications specialists did every day, but there were moments that shattered that comforting illusion. The hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, the occasional visitor who arrived with bruised knuckles or haunted eyes. The way certain topics were discussed in careful euphemisms, rather than direct terms. And then there was Dante himself. He remained a contradiction I couldn't resolve, capable of both calculated cruelty and unexpected kindness. I'd seen him threaten a man over a business dispute with such quiet menace that the man nearly collapsed, then hours later donate millions to a children's hospital with genuine compassion. He could discuss art and literature with more insight than most professors I'd known, then casually mention handling a problem in ways that made my blood run cold. Most unsettling was his growing interest in me. It manifested in small ways at first, lingering glances, casual touches that weren't quite necessary, private dinners that stretched longer each time. He never crossed obvious lines, maintaining professional boundaries during business hours, but the undercurrent between us grew stronger with each passing day. By the end of my first month, rumors circulated among staff about my privileged position. Sophia's initial coolness had intensified to barely disguised resentment. Only Anton remained consistently neutral, though I sometimes caught him watching me with what might have been concern. You need to be careful, Ellie said during one of our weekly phone calls, her voice tight with worry. He doesn't see you as an employee, Liv. I know what I'm doing, I assured her, though I felt increasingly less certain. How are things in Orlando? Fine. Quiet. She hesitated. Jason's body was found, did you know? It was on the news. A swimming accident in Mexico. My stomach clenched. I did know. Had seen the press reports come across my desk. Had even helped craft the statement expressing the Russo Group's condolences to the family of a former associate. I heard, I said neutrally. I'm sorry, Ellie. Are you? She asked, her voice breaking. Because you sound different, Liv, like you're becoming one of them. Her words haunted me for days afterward. Was I changing? Adapting too well to this world of power and moral compromise? I told myself I was merely playing a role, maintaining the facade necessary to survive. But sometimes the line between pretending and becoming blurred dangerously. 6 weeks into my contract, everything shifted. It began with a charity gala, one of Miami's most prestigious annual events, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen, while ostensibly raising money for education. As the Russo Group's media coordinator, my attendance was required. What I hadn't expected was Dante's insistence that I attend as his personal guest, rather than as staff. It sends the wrong message, I argued in his office the day before the event. I'm your employee, not your date. He leaned back in his chair, regarding me with that measured gaze that gave nothing away. In my world, Olivia, appearances matter. Arriving with my media coordinator suggests business. Arriving with a beautiful woman suggests stability, normalcy. So I'm a prop, I said flatly. His mouth curved. You're never merely a prop. You're an asset. Intelligent, articulate, elegant. Exactly who should be by my side at such events. And the fact that people will assume we're involved. Let them assume, he said with a shrug. Such assumptions can be useful. I crossed my arms. Useful for you, maybe, not for my professional reputation. Your professional reputation is tied to mine now, he reminded me. At least for the next 4.5 months, the reminder of my temporary status should have reassured me. Instead, it sent an unexpected pang through me, one I refused to examine too closely. Fine, I conceded. But I'm not wearing whatever you've selected this time. I'll choose my own dress. He smiled, a genuine one that transformed his face. Already taken care of. There's a fitting scheduled this afternoon with Valentino's people. You'll have options. I blinked. Valentino? That's appropriate for the occasion, he finished smoothly. Consider it a business expense. The following evening found me examining my reflection in the guest house mirror, barely recognizing myself. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to float around me, modest yet alluring in its perfect tailoring. Diamond drops hung from my ears, matched by a simple diamond pendant that rested just above my collarbone. My hair was swept up by the stylist Dante had sent, my makeup professionally applied to enhance without overwhelming. I looked like I belonged in Dante's world. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. When I emerged from the guest house, he was waiting by the car himself, rather than sending Anton. He stilled when he saw me, his eyes darkening in a way that made heat curl through my veins, despite my best efforts to remain detached. Perfect, he said simply, the single word carrying more weight than effusive compliments from any other man. The gala was held at the city's most exclusive hotel, transformed for the evening into a glittering wonderland of lights and flowers. As Dante guided me through the entrance, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back, I felt the eyes of Miami's elite tracking our arrival, the subtle shifting of expressions. Curiosity, speculation, envy told me exactly what they were thinking. Everyone's staring, I murmured. Of course they are, he replied, his mouth close to my ear. We're the most interesting people here. His confidence should have seemed arrogant. Instead, it settled around me like a protective cloak as we moved through the crowd. Dante navigated the social currents with practiced ease, introducing me to key figures, business leaders, politicians, celebrities, with perfect timing and context. Mr. Russo, greeted the mayor, his handshake a little too enthusiastic to be natural. Wonderful to see you supporting such a worthy cause. Education has always been a priority for the Russo Group, Dante replied smoothly. May I introduce Olivia Carter, our new media relations director? I smiled and shook the mayor's hand, noting how his eyes darted between Dante and me, clearly trying to determine the true nature of our relationship. Ms. Carter has been instrumental in developing our new scholarship program, Dante continued, placing his hand at the small of my back again. Perhaps you've seen the preliminary press coverage. Yes, of course, the mayor said, though his expression suggested he hadn't. Very impressive initiative. As we moved away, I gave Dante a sidelong glance. Scholarship program? Being announced next week, he said. Fully funded 4-year college scholarships for 50 underprivileged students annually. That's actually amazing, I admitted, surprised by the genuineness of the initiative. Try not to sound so shocked, he said, amusement coloring his voice. Not everything I do has ulterior motives. Doesn't it? I couldn't help asking. His smile turned enigmatic. Perhaps we should discuss this over champagne. He led me to a quieter corner of the ballroom, procuring 2 flutes from a passing waiter. The champagne was excellent, crisp and perfectly chilled. "You're handling yourself well," Dante observed, his eyes moving over my face. "This isn't your first high society event." "I covered the social beat for the Miami Herald during my internship," I explained. "I learned how these things work, observing rather than participating," he noted. "And now?" I met his gaze. "Still observing, just from a different perspective. You see more than most," he said, his voice dropping lower. "It's one of your most attractive qualities." Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. A man was arguing with security, his voice rising above the elegant murmur of conversation. "I have every right to be here. I paid for a ticket." Dante's expression hardened. "Excuse me," he said, handing me his champagne flute. "This requires attention." I watched as he crossed the room with measured steps, speaking briefly to security before approaching the agitated man. They exchanged words I couldn't hear. Dante's posture relaxed, but somehow radiating authority. The man's face flushed red, but after a moment, he nodded stiffly and allowed himself to be escorted out. "Problem resolved?" I asked when Dante returned. "For now," he replied, his expression giving nothing away. "Shall we dance?" The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. "Dance?" "It's customary at these events," he said, already taking the champagne from my hand and setting both glasses aside. "And I find I want to hold you." The blunt admission sent a jolt through me, a mixture of alarm and something far more dangerous. "Dante?" "One dance, Olivia," he said, extending his hand. "For appearances, if nothing else." I placed my hand in his, telling myself it was simply part of the role I was playing. His fingers closed around mine, warm and firm, as he led me to the dance floor where other couples moved to the music of a live orchestra. He drew me into his arms with practiced ease, one hand at my waist, the other clasping mine. The proper distance for a formal dance, yet somehow more intimate than I'd expected. I rested my free hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength beneath the perfect tailoring of his tuxedo. "Relax," he murmured as we began to move with the music. "I don't bite, don't you?" I countered, meeting his eyes. His smile was slow, predatory. "Not unless asked very nicely." Heat flared through me, unwelcome and undeniable. I looked away, focusing on the other dancers, the elaborate floral arrangements, anything but the man holding me. "You're fighting this," he observed, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Fighting us." "There is no us," I said firmly. "There's a contract, a business arrangement, nothing more." "Is that what you tell yourself?" His hand at my waist drew me fractionally closer. "That what's building between us is merely business? It has to be," I insisted, though my body betrayed me, responding to his proximity with embarrassing eagerness. He studied my face, his dark eyes missing nothing. "You're afraid," he said finally. "Not of me, but of your own responses, your own desires." I stiffened in his arms. "You don't know what I desire, don't I?" He bent his head slightly, his lips nearly brushing my ear. "Your pupils dilate when I enter a room. Your pulse quickens when I touch you. Like now, at your wrist. You watch me when you think I'm not looking. With hunger, you try to disguise as professional attention." Each observation landed like a physical touch, stripping away the defenses I'd built so carefully. I pulled back slightly, needing distance. "This is inappropriate," I managed. "Perhaps," he conceded, not loosening his hold. "But it's honest. More honest than you've been with yourself." Before I could form a response, the music ended. Dante released me but kept my hand in his, raising it to his lips in a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and intensely intimate. "Thank you for the dance, Olivia," he said, his eyes holding mine. "The first of many, I hope." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and carefully orchestrated conversations. Dante kept me close, his hand returning to the small of my back whenever we moved through the crowd, his attention focused on me even when speaking to others. By the time we left, the speculation in the eyes that followed us had solidified into certainty. I was Dante Russo's new woman. The car ride back to his estate was silent, tension vibrating in the space between us. Anton drove, his presence a buffer I was grateful for, preventing any continuation of our charged conversation from the dance floor. When we arrived, Dante dismissed Anton with a nod and walked me to the guest house himself. The night air was balmy, stars visible now that we were away from the city's light pollution. I could smell jasmine and the salt of the nearby ocean, mingling with Dante's cologne as he moved beside me. At my door, I turned to bid him a polite goodnight, only to find him standing closer than I'd expected, his eyes darker than usual in the dim lighting. "Thank you for tonight," I said, striving for professionalism. "I think we made a good impression with the mayor and the education commissioner." "Always the professional," he murmured, reaching up to touch a strand of hair that had escaped my updo. "Even now." His fingers brushed my cheek as he tucked the strand behind my ear, lingering there. I should have stepped back, maintained the boundaries I'd been so determined to enforce. Instead, I remained frozen, caught between desire and caution. "Dante," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This can't happen." "It already is happening," he replied, his hand cupping my cheek now. "Has been since the moment you dared to challenge me at Velvet. I work for you," I reminded him, though the objection sounded weak even to my own ears. "For now," he agreed. "But that's not all you are to me, Olivia. It never has been." He leaned closer, his intent clear, giving me time to pull away. I knew I should. Every rational thought demanded it. But some deeper, more primal part of me had been wanting this since that first night, curious about what it would feel like to be wanted by a man like Dante Russo. Dangerous, powerful, impossible. His lips touched mine, gentle at first, almost questioning. Then, as I failed to retreat, the kiss deepened, his hand sliding from my cheek to the back of my neck, drawing me closer. I responded despite myself, my hands moving to his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast beneath my palm. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. Not domineering or possessive, but attentive, exploratory, as if he was learning me, memorizing my responses. When he finally pulled back, his breathing was as uneven as mine. His eyes heated in a way that made my knees weak. "Tell me you haven't thought about this," he challenged softly. "Tell me you haven't wondered." I couldn't lie, not with the evidence of my response still lingering between us. "Wondering isn't the same as acting," I said instead. "No," he agreed. "Acting requires courage." His thumb traced my lower lip, still sensitive from his kiss. "You've never lacked for that, Olivia." I stepped back, needing distance to clear my head. "This complicates things." "Life is complications," he countered. "The question is which ones are worth embracing." He didn't press further, simply brushing his knuckles against my cheek in a touch that felt oddly tender. "Good night, Olivia. Think about what you want. Not what you think you should want, or what others expect. What you truly desire." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing at my door, my lips still burning from his kiss, my certainties in shambles around me. The next morning, I woke to news that shattered the fragile equilibrium of the previous weeks. The man who had been ejected from the gala, Martin Hernandez, a local journalist known for investigative pieces on corruption, had been found beaten severely, left in an alley behind his apartment building. I stared at the news report on my phone, ice forming in my stomach. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. The confrontation at the gala, followed by violence hours later. I remembered Dante's expression when he'd returned from dealing with the problem, the coolness in his eyes that should have warned me. While I'd been dancing in his arms, had he been ordering a man's assault? Had he kissed me with the same mouth that had directed violence against a journalist whose only crime was asking uncomfortable questions? I dressed quickly and headed for the main house, anger and fear warring within me. When I reached Dante's office, Sophia tried to intercept me. "Mr. Russo is in a meeting." I pushed past her, throwing open the door without knocking. Dante sat behind his desk on the phone, while two men I recognized as part of his security team stood nearby. All three looked up at my intrusion, Dante's expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "I'll call back," he said into the phone before setting it down. "Gentlemen, give us a moment." The men filed out, closing the door behind them. Sophia hovered in the doorway until Dante nodded, dismissing her as well. "This is unexpected," he said calmly, "especially after last night." I tossed my phone onto his desk, the news article about Hernandez displayed on the screen. "Did you order this?" He glanced at the phone, his expression revealing nothing. "Good morning to you too, Olivia. Answer the question," I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Did you have that journalist attacked?" "Sit down," he said, his tone hardening. "I'll stand." "Sit down." Each word was clipped, commanding. "Before you say something you'll regret." I remained standing for a moment longer, a small act of defiance before dropping into the chair across from him. Dante studied me, his face unreadable. "Martin Hernandez has been investigating my businesses for months," he said finally, attempting to connect the Russo group to certain unsavory activities. "So you had him beaten?" My voice rose. "He's a journalist doing his job." "I did not order his assault," Dante said, each word precise, "though I won't pretend to be sorry it happened." "You expect me to believe that, after you confronted him at the gala? After you—" I broke off, unable to mention the kiss now, tainted as it was by the night's violence. "Whether you believe me is your choice," he replied, leaning back in his chair, "but facts remain facts. I spoke to Hernandez at the gala because he was attempting to confront one of my business associates using a fraudulently obtained invitation. I had him removed. What happened afterward was not my doing." I searched his face for signs of deception, finding none. But I'd seen how well Dante could control his expressions, reveal only what he wanted others to see. "Then who did it?" I challenged. "Miami is full of people with enemies," he said simply. "Hernandez has written hit pieces on half the power players in this city. Any of them could have decided he needed a lesson in discretion. It was plausible, but convenient. Too convenient." "I don't believe you." Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or anger carefully controlled. "That's your prerogative. But consider this, Olivia. If I wanted to silence Hernandez permanently, he wouldn't be recovering in a hospital. He wouldn't have been found at all." A chill ran through me at the casual way he referenced murder, as if it were simply another business strategy in his arsenal. "So I'm supposed to be grateful you only had him beaten, not killed?" I asked bitterly. Dante's expression hardened. "I just told you I didn't order the assault. Your refusal to believe me suggests you've already decided what kind of man I am, regardless of the truth." "I know exactly what kind of man you are," I said, rising from my chair. "I just forgot it for a moment last night." "Did you?" He stood as well, coming around the desk to stand before me. "Or did you see the truth, that I'm neither the monster you fear nor the saint you wish for? That, like everyone, I exist in the gray spaces between extremes?" "There's nothing gray about violence," I insisted, "isn't there?" His voice was soft now, dangerous. "You live in a country built on violence, prosper in a global economy that exploits millions, benefit from systems that crush the vulnerable. But those violences are distant, sanitized, acceptable. You only object when it happens close enough to disturb your conscience." His words hit with uncomfortable precision. How many times had I written press releases for corporations with questionable labor practices? How many luxury products had I promoted that were produced in sweatshops? The moral high ground I was claiming suddenly felt less secure. "That doesn't justify what happened to Hernandez," I said, though my voice had lost some of its certainty. "No, it doesn't," Dante agreed unexpectedly. "If I knew who was responsible, they would answer for acting without authorization. In my organization, discipline and chain of command are paramount." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man before me with the kiss we'd shared, with the violence that had occurred hours later. "I can't do this," I said finally. "Whatever was starting between us last night, it can't continue." Something like resignation crossed his face. "Because you think I ordered an assault? Or because you're afraid of your own attraction to someone who lives outside the boundaries of conventional morality?" "Both," I wanted to say, but couldn't voice the admission. "I'll fulfill my contract," I said instead. 4 more months, but it needs to be strictly professional from now on." Dante watched me for a long moment, his dark eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. "As you wish," he said finally. Though I suspect you'll find that harder than you imagine. He wasn't wrong. The following weeks proved excruciating. Working closely with him while maintaining emotional distance, feeling his eyes on me in meetings, remembering the heat of his kiss whenever we were alone together. I threw myself into work, producing media strategies with ruthless efficiency, avoiding situations where we might be left alone. Dante respected my boundaries outwardly, reverting to formal politeness that was somehow worse than any attempt to persuade me otherwise would have been. But I caught him watching me sometimes with an intensity that made my resolve waver. Brief moments when the mask of professional detachment slipped. 3 months into my contract, everything changed again. A rival organization made moves against Dante's territories, resulting in violence that couldn't be hidden from the press. A nightclub bombing, a warehouse fire, 2 of Dante's men found dead in a car with their throats cut. I watched from the sidelines, crafting statements that distanced the Russo group from these tragic criminal activities, while witnessing the reality behind closed doors. Dante became harder, colder, working late into the night. Security around the estate doubled, his rare smiles vanishing entirely. 4 months in, the breaking point came. I was working late in my office when I heard shouting from the main hall, followed by the sound of something shattering. I moved to my door, opening it cautiously to find the house in chaos. Security personnel rushed past, weapons drawn. Sophia stood at the end of the hall, her face pale, speaking rapidly into a phone. "What's happening?" I asked as she hung up. "There's been an attack," she said, her usual composure cracking. "At Mr. Russo's sister's home." I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd met Lucia once, Dante's younger sister, the only family he had left, the person he protected above all others. "Is she alive?" Sophia confirmed, "but injured. Mr. Russo is on his way there now." The next hours passed in tense silence. Staff moved through the house like ghosts, speaking in hushed tones. I remained in my office, unable to focus on work, but unwilling to return to the guest house while the situation remained unresolved. It was past midnight when Dante returned. I heard his arrival, the slam of car doors, rapid footsteps, low voices issuing commands. Without thinking, I moved toward the main hall, drawn by concern I couldn't suppress despite our recent distance. He stood in the center of the room, giving instructions to his security team, his face a mask of cold fury I'd never seen before. Blood stained his white shirt. His sister's, I realized with a jolt of horror. "I want every property watched," he was saying, his voice deadly calm. Every associate questioned. "Find out who talked, who gave them Lucia's address." He looked up as I entered, his eyes meeting mine across the room. Something flickered in his expression, a momentary softening before the mask returned. "Everyone out," he ordered suddenly. "Except Ms. Carter." The room cleared instantly, security personnel and staff disappearing with practiced efficiency. When we were alone, Dante remained where he was, his hands clenched at his sides, violence radiating from him in almost visible waves. "How is she?" I asked quietly. "Stable," he replied, his voice tight. The bullet missed anything vital, but if I'd been 10 minutes later, he trailed off, the implication hanging in the air between us. I moved closer, caution warring with compassion. "I'm sorry about Lucia. Is there anything I can do?" He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. "Why are you still here, Olivia? It's the middle of the night. I heard what happened. I was concerned." The admission slipped out before I could censor it. "Concerned," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Despite believing me capable of having journalists beaten, despite maintaining your careful distance these past weeks, I had no answer that wouldn't reveal too much of my confused feelings. Instead, I asked, 'What will you do now?' His expression darkened. "What needs to be done? They targeted my family, Olivia. There's only one response to that." The cold certainty in his voice made it clear what he meant. Retaliation. Violence answered with greater violence. "Dante," I began, not even sure what I intended to say. "Don't," he cut me off sharply. "Don't tell me about justice or legal recourse or moral boundaries. Not tonight." I fell silent, recognizing the futility of such arguments in this moment. Instead, I moved closer still, until I stood directly before him. Without speaking, I reached out and took his hand, the one clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He stared at our joined hands, surprise momentarily replacing anger in his expression. Then his fingers closed around mine, gripping with almost painful intensity. "You should go," he said, his voice rough. "You don't want to be part of what happens next." "No," I agreed quietly. "I don't. But I'm not leaving you like this." Something shifted in his eyes, vulnerability breaking through the fury for just a moment. "Why?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. One I wasn't sure I fully understood myself. Because despite everything, I care what happens to you, to Lucia. Because the lines I thought were so clear aren't anymore. He studied my face, searching for deception and finding none. "You once told me there's nothing gray about violence," he reminded me. I was wrong, I admitted. Or at least incomplete in my understanding. The world is messier than I wanted to believe. Dante's free hand rose to cup my cheek, his touch gentle despite the violence I knew those same hands were capable of. Messy is one word for it. I leaned into his touch, abandoning the last pretense that I could remain emotionally detached from this man. "What happens now? With us?" "That depends on you," he said, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "I've made my interest clear. My feelings haven't changed, despite your withdrawal." "And in 2 months, when my contract ends?" I asked, giving voice to the question that had haunted me for weeks. "What then?" "That was always your choice, Olivia," he said quietly. "Stay or go. I won't hold you if you choose to leave." I searched his face, looking for deception and finding none. "You'd let me walk away? After everything I've seen, everything I know about your operations?" "Yes," he said simply. "Though I'd prefer you stayed because you wanted to, not out of obligation or fear." The honesty in his voice undid me. I rose on tiptoes, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that answered more eloquently than words. He responded immediately, his arms encircling me, pulling me against him as if he'd been starving for this contact during our weeks of separation. When we finally parted, both breathing hard, I rested my forehead against his chest. "I don't know if I can be part of your world, Dante. Not all of it. Not the violence. I don't expect you to be," he said, stroking my hair. "But perhaps we can find a middle ground. A way for you to remain true to your principles while accepting who I am." It wasn't a perfect solution, but in that moment, it felt like enough. A beginning, at least. "I should go," I said reluctantly. "You have things to handle." He nodded, understanding my deliberate vagueness. "Yes, but afterward we'll talk," I promised. "Figure out what this is between us, what it could be." He released me slowly, as if reluctant to break contact. "Be careful, Olivia. Until this situation is resolved, stay close to the house. Anton will escort you anywhere you need to go." The reminder of danger sobered me. "How long will it take to resolve things?" "Not long," he said, his expression hardening again. "A week, perhaps 2. Then we can discuss the future, our future, if that's what you want." As I returned to the guest house that night, escorted by a somber Anton, I found myself at a crossroads I'd never imagined when I first slapped Dante Russo in a nightclub 5 months ago. My old life, journalism, moral certainty, clear boundaries between right and wrong, seemed distant now, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of power, compromise, and the gray areas where most of life actually happens. 2 weeks later, the rival organization that had targeted Dante's sister had been dismantled. Through means I deliberately didn't inquire about, Lucia recovered fully, protected now by security measures that would have rivaled a head of states. And I made my decision. On the final day of my 6-month contract, Dante waited in his office while I packed my belongings in the guest house. The terms had been fulfilled. Ellie's debt cleared, my obligation complete. The promised payment had been deposited in my account. I was free to walk away, return to my old life, pursue the journalism career I'd once been so certain was my calling. Instead, I left most of my things where they were and crossed the lawn to the main house. my heart racing, but my mind clear. Dante looked up as I entered his office, his expression carefully neutral. "You've decided then?" "Yes," I said simply. "I'm staying." The tension visibly left his body, though his voice remained controlled. "In what capacity?" I moved toward him, stopping at the edge of his desk. "As your partner. Not in everything. There are lines I still can't cross, aspects of your business I can't be part of, but beside you, nonetheless." He stood, coming around the desk to face me directly. "You understand what that means? The complications? The compromises?" "I do," I said with more certainty than I'd felt about anything in months. "I've spent 6 months seeing you clearly, Dante. Both the darkness and the light. I choose you anyway." He cupped my face in his hands, his eyes searching mine. "There will be challenges. My world isn't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is," I countered, covering his hands with mine. "But I know who I am now, who you are. The real woman who slapped a mafia boss for her friend, and the real man who smiled and saw something in her worth pursuing." His smile, the genuine one that transformed his face, appeared slowly. "You were worth every complication, Olivia Carter," as his lips met mine, sealing our future with a kiss that promised both passion and partnership. I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be boundaries to navigate, principles to uphold, difficult conversations about where my involvement ended and his other world began. But for the first time since that fateful night at Velvet, I felt completely certain. Not because Dante was perfect. He wasn't. Not remotely. But because I finally understood myself. The woman who needed black and white certainties had evolved into someone who could navigate shades of gray without losing herself entirely. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead to the most profound transformations. My hand connecting with Dante's cheek that night had set us both on a collision course that neither of us could have predicted. A slap that turned into an embrace, an enemy who became a lover, a captive who chose to stay on her own terms. "Finally," he murmured against my lips, echoing his words from our first meeting. "My real woman." And this time,